Section 10 of History of Egypt, Volume 1, by Gaston Maspero. Read for LibriVox.org into the public domain. Chapter 2 The Gods of Egypt, Part 2. The same stream also carried a whole crowd of gods, whose existence was revealed at night only to the inhabitants of earth. At an interval of 12 hours, and in its own bark, the pale disk of the moon, Ya'uhu Ahuhu, Ya'uhu Auhu, followed the disk of the sun along the ramparts of the world. The moon also appeared in many various forms, here as a man born of Neut, there as a cynocephalus or an ibis, elsewhere it was the left eye of Horus, guarded by the ibis or cynocephalus. Like Ra, it had its enemies incessantly upon the watch for it, the crocodile, the hippopotamus, and the sow. But it was when at the full, about the 15th of each month, that the lunar eye was in greatest peril. The sow fell upon it, tore it out of the face of heaven, and cast it, streaming with blood and tears, into the celestial Nile, where it was gradually extinguished, and lost for days. But its twin, the sun, or its guardian, the cynocephalus, immediately set forth to find it and to restore it to Horus. No sooner was it replaced, than it slowly recovered, and renewed its radiance. When it was well, Uzeit, the sow again attacked and mutilated it, and the gods rescued and again revived it. Each month there was a fortnight of youth and growing splendor, followed by a fortnight's agony and ever-increasing pallor. It was born to die, and died to be born again 12 times in the year, and each of these cycles measured a month for the inhabitants of the world. One invariable accident from time to time disturbed the routine of its existence. Profiting by some distraction of the guardians, the sow greedily swallowed it, and then its light went out suddenly instead of fading gradually. These eclipses, which alarmed mankind at least as much as did those of the sun, were scarcely more than momentary, the gods compelling the monster to cast up the eye before it had been destroyed. Every evening the lunar bark issued out of Hades by the door which Ra had passed through in the morning, and as it rose on the horizon, the star lamps scattered over the firmament appeared one by one, giving light here and there like the campfires of a distant army. However many of them there might be, there were as many indestructibles, Akhihmu Soku, or unchanging ones, Akhihmu Urdu, whose charge it was to attend upon them and watch over their maintenance. They were not scattered at random by the hand which had suspended them, but their distribution had been ordered in accordance with a certain plan, and they were arranged in fixed groups like so many star republics, each being independent of its neighbors. They represented the outlines of bodies of men and animals dimly traced out upon the depths of night, but shining with greater brilliancy in certain important places. The 7 stars which we liken to a chariot, Charles's Wain, suggested to the Egyptians the haunch of an ox placed on the northern edge of the horizon. 2 lesser stars connected the haunch, Mashkhayet, with 13 others, which recalled the silhouette of a female hippopotamus, Wirit, erect upon her hind legs, and jauntily carrying upon her shoulders a monstrous crocodile, whose jaws opened threateningly above her head. 18 luminaries of varying size and splendor, forming a group hard by the hippopotamus, indicated the outline of a gigantic lioned couchant, with stiffened tail, its head turned to the right and facing the haunch. The lion is sometimes shown as having a crocodile's tail. According to Bio, the Egyptian lion has nothing in common with the Greek constellation of that name, nor yet with our own, but was composed of smaller stars, belonging to the Greek constellation of the Cup, or to the continuation of the Hydra, so that its head, its body, and its tail would follow the Hydra or of the Virgin. Most of the constellations never left the sky; night after night they were to be found almost in the same places, and always shining with the same even light. Others, borne by a slow movement, passed annually beyond the limits of sight for months at a time. 5 at least of our planets were known from all antiquity, and their characteristic colours and appearance carefully noted. Sometimes each was thought to be a hawk-headed Horus, Uapshetuti, our Jupiter, Kahiri, Saturn, Sobku, Mercury, steered their bark straight ahead like Iahu and Ra, but Mars Doshiri, the Red, sailed backwards. As a star, Bonu, the bird, Venus, had a dual personality, In the evening it was Uati, the lonely star which is the first to rise, often before nightfall; in the morning it became Tianutiri, the god who hails the sun before his rising, and proclaims the dawn of day. Sahu and Sopdet, Orion and Sirius, were the rulers of this mysterious world. Sahu consisted of 15 stars, 7 large and 8 small, so arranged as to represent a runner darting through space, while the fairest of them shone above his head, and marked him out from afar to the admiration of mortals. With his right hand he flourished the crux ansata, and turning his head towards Sothis, as he beckoned her on with his left, seemed as though inviting her to follow him. The goddess, standing sceptre in hand, and crowned with a diadem of tall feathers surmounted by her most radiant star, answered the call of Sahu with a gesture, and quietly embarked in pursuit as though in no anxiety to overtake him. Sometimes she is represented as a cow lying down in her bark, with tree stars along her back, and Sirius flaming from between her horns. Not content to shine by night only, her bluish rays suddenly darted forth in full daylight and without any warning, often described upon the sky the mystic lines of the triangle which stood for her name. It was then that she produced those curious phenomena of the zodiacal light which other legends attributed to Horus himself. One, and perhaps the most ancient of the innumerable accounts of this god and goddess, represented Sahu as a wild hunter. A world as vast as ours rested upon the other side of the iron firmament; like ours, it was distributed into seas, and continents divided by rivers and canals, but peopled by races unknown to men. Sahu traversed it during the day, surrounded by genii who presided over the lamps forming his constellation. At his appearing, the stars prepared themselves for battle, the heavenly archers rushed forward, the bones of the gods upon the horizon trembled at the sight of him, for it was no common game that he hunted, but the very gods themselves. One attendant secured the prey with a lasso, as bulls are caught in the pastures, while another examined each capture to decide if it were pure and good for food. This being determined, others bound the divine victim, cut its throat, disembowelled it, cut up its carcass, cast the joints into a pot, and superintended their cooking. Sahu did not devour indifferently all that the fortune of the chase might bring him, but classified his game in accordance with his wants. He ate the great gods at his breakfast in the morning, the lesser gods at his dinner towards noon, and the small ones at his supper; the old were rendered more tender by roasting. As each god was assimilated by him, its most precious virtues were transfused into himself; by the wisdom of the old was his wisdom strengthened, the youth of the youth repaired the daily waste of his own youth, and all their fires, as they penetrated his being, served to maintain the perpetual splendour of his light. The nome gods who presided over the destinies of Egyptian cities, and formed a true feudal system of divinities, belonged to one or the other of these natural categories. In vain do they present themselves under the most shifting aspects and the most deceptive attributes, in vain disguise themselves with the utmost care; a closer examination generally discloses the principal features of their original physiognomies: Osiris of the Delta, Khu'umu of the Cataract, Harshafatu of Heracleopolis, were each of them incarnations of the fertilizing and life-sustaining Nile. Wherever there is some important change in the river, there they are more especially installed and worshipped: Khnummu at the place of its entering into Egypt, and again at the town of Haurit, near the point where a great arm branches off from the eastern stream to flow towards the Libyan hills and form the Bahr Yusuf; Harshafitu at the gorges of the Fayum, where the Bahr Yusuf leaves the valley; and finally Osiris at Mendes and at Busiris, towards the mouth of the middle branch, which was held to be the true Nile by the people of the land. Isis of Buto denoted the black vegetable mould of the valley, the distinctive soil of Egypt annually covered and fertilized by the inundation. But the earth in general, as distinguished from the sky, the earth with its continents, its seas, its alternation of barren deserts and fertile lands, was represented as a man: Ptah at Memphis, Ammon at Thebes, Minu at Coptos and at Panopolis. Ammon seems rather to have symbolized the productive soil, while Minu reigned over the desert. But these were fine distinctions, not invariably insisted upon, and his worshippers often invested Ammon with the most significant attributes of Minu. The sky gods, like the earth gods, were separated into two groups, the one consisting of women, Hathor of Denderah, or Neat of Sais; the other composed of men identical with Horus, or derived from him, Anhuri Shu of Sebennytos and Thinis; Harmurati, Horus of the two eyes, at Pharbethos; Harsapdi, Horus the source of the zodiacal light, in the Wadi Tumilat; and finally Harhuditi at Edfu. Ra, the solar disk, was enthroned at Heliopolis, and sun gods were numerous among the nome deities, but they were sun gods closely connected with gods representing the sky, and resembled Horus quite as much as Ra. Whether under the name of Horus or Anhuri, the sky was early identified with its most brilliant luminary, its solar eye, and its divinity, as it were, fused into that of the sun. Horus the sun, and Ra the sun god of Heliopolis, had so permeated each other that none could say where the one began and the other ended. One by one all the functions of Ra had been usurped by Horus, and all the designations of Horus had been appropriated by Ra. The sun was styled Harmakhuiti, the Horus of the two mountains, that is, the Horus who comes forth from the mountain of the east in the morning, and retires at evening into the mountain of the west; or Hartima, Horus the pikeman, that Horus whose lance spears the hippopotamus or the serpent of the celestial river; or Hanubi, the golden Horus, the great golden sparrowhawk with mottled plumage, who puts all other birds to flight; and these titles were indifferently applied to each of the feudal gods who represented the sun. The latter were numerous. Sometimes, as in the case of Harkobi, Horus of Kobiu, a geographical qualification was appended to the generic term of Horus, while specific names, almost invariably derived from the parts which they were supposed to play, were borne by others. The sky god worshipped at Thinis in Upper Egypt, at Zarit and Sebennytos in Lower Egypt, was called Anhuri. When he assumed the attributes of Ra, and took upon himself the solar nature, his name was interpreted as denoting the conqueror of the sky. He was essentially combative. Crowned with a group of upright plumes, his spear raised and ever ready to strike his foe, he advanced along the firmament and triumphantly traversed it day by day. The sun god who at Metamofk, Tod, and Urment had preceded Ammon as ruler of the Theban plain, was also a warrior, and his name of Montu had reference to his method of fighting. He was depicted as brandishing a curved sword and cutting off the heads of his adversaries. Each of the feudal gods naturally cherished pretensions to universal dominion, and proclaimed himself the suzerain, the father of all the gods, as the local prince was the suzerain, the father of all men; but the effective suzerainty of god or prince really ended where that of his peers ruling over the adjacent nomes began. The goddesses shared in the exercise of supreme power, and had the same right of inheritance and possession as regards sovereignty that women had in human law. Isis was entitled Lady and Mistress at Buto, as Hathor was at Denderah, and as Neat at Sais, the firstborn, when as yet there had been no birth. They enjoyed in their cities the same honours as the male gods in theirs: the latter were kings, so were they queens, and all bowed down before them. The animal gods, whether entirely in the form of beasts, or having human bodies attached to animal heads, shared omnipotence with those in human form. Horus of Hibonu swooped down upon the back of a gazelle like a hunting hawk; Hathor of Denderah was a cow; Bastet of Bubastis was a cat or a tigress, while Nekhabit of El Kab was a great bald-headed vulture. Hermopolis worshipped the ibis and Cynocephalus of Thought; Oxyrhynchus the mormirus fish; and Ombos and the Fayum a crocodile, under the name of Sobku, sometimes with the epithet of Azei, the brigand. We cannot always understand what led the inhabitants of each nome to affect one animal rather than another. Why, towards Greco Roman times, should they have worshipped the jackal, or even the dog, at Siut? How came Sit to be incarnate in a fennec, or in an imaginary quadruped? Occasionally, however, we can follow the train of thought that determined their choice. The habit of certain monkeys in assembling as it were in full court, and chattering noisily a little before sunrise and sunset, would almost justify the as yet uncivilized Egyptians in entrusting Cynocephaly with the charge of hailing the god morning and evening as he appeared in the east or passed away in the west. Section 11. Read by Professor Heather and By. For more free audiobooks or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org.